You end up with the DRAM LED like we were getting. Make sure they are clipped in all the way. First step should always be to go down to a single module, as this not only rules out that one of the modules might be bad, it can also tell you if you have a bad DIMM slot. The removal process on a lot of modern motherboards will actually restart the RAM training process, which just gets you out of a weird bug. If this doesn't work, I'd switch to modules, then try a different DIMM slot. But a pro tip, always try first in slot 2. But if none of that works, make sure that your system's unplugged. Then look on your motherboard I/O panel and see if you have a button that says clear CMOS. Press that if you do. And if your motherboard doesn't have that button, you can do the exact same thing by locating the clear CMOS pins on your motherboard and shorting them with a screwdriver. And if it's a really old motherboard, your only way to do that might have been just to pop out your CMOS battery. What that does is reset all the BIOS settings, including your factory RAM overclock, to cause your system to fail to post. And if all of that doesn't work, the last thing to always check is to remove that cooler again, pull your CPU out, check for socket damage, as that will often mess with the memory controller. But if there is no damage, just try reseating your CPU. But if none of that works, it's probably the memory controller on your CPU, so you may want to replace that. Now, if you ever get a VGA LED, well, that's going to mean an issue with your GPU. Make sure you're plugged in right, as well as make sure that your power cable is nice and secure on the GPU side, as well as on the power supply side. But if those are all secure, I'd recommend pulling your GPU out, and after inspecting the PCIe connector to make sure it's all good, I'd go ahead and reseat it, making sure it's fully slotted in. And if you're still getting a VGA LED with no display from your GPU, I'd try a couple things, including maybe switching from HDMI to DisplayPort or from one DisplayPort to another. And depending on your motherboard, you may have a secondary PCIe slot that you could use to move your GPU down, at least temporarily. Why it's not the PCIe slot. None of that works. If you happen to have a CPU that does have integrated graphics, well, you can then finally unplug from the GPU and plug in directly to the motherboard. Even though this is not ideal, it should give you a display out, which should help you figure out if you have a bad card or not. Then if you happen to get a boot LED, well, you typically only hang on the boot LED because of two things. You've never installed an operating system, but typically if that's still there, you'll at least get to the BIOS, or you have a bad drive connected. In those circumstances, I usually like to go ahead and disconnect every drive I have attached to the system, externally connected over a cable, as well as directly slotted into my motherboard like an M.2 drive. Then if you post after that, I'd add each drive back one by one. And whenever one causes it to reappear, well, that's your issue. And that should help you figure out just about any post error with diagnostic LEDs on the motherboard. But if your motherboard doesn't have these because it's a little bit older, you'll be operating a little bit more blind, but I'd go through the exact same steps, but operate in the order of testing my RAM first, then go to my GPU, then finally my CPU, and finish up with storage. As that will take you from the most common issue to the least to be able to figure out what's wrong. And if nothing seems to work or make any difference, well, then it's probably your motherboard.